Layla stood on the edge of the garden, staring at the old oak tree where she used to swing as a child. Its leaves rustled softly, whispering memories only she could hear. This had been her world, her grandmother Margaret's estate, her home, her haven, her everything. Everyone in the family knew Layla wasn't just the favorite, she was the heart of the household. After her mother's sudden death when she was only 10, Margaret had taken her in like she was her own daughter. Every bedtime story, every home-cooked meal, every comforting hand on her shoulder during teenage heartbreaks. It had all come from her grandmother. Layla had spent sleepless nights at her bedside during her final illness, rubbing her feet, reading her poetry, sometimes just holding her hand while the silence of approaching death settled in. That's why today felt surreal. Margaret was gone. The house was quiet, and for the first time in years, Layla felt like an outsider. The estate was filled with distant relatives today, faces she barely recognized except for the fake hugs and 2 sweet smiles. But Layla knew who mattered. Only 2 people had truly been close to Margaret, her and her cousin Violet. Violet had always been around, slinking through the halls like a shadow. She was charming in public, sharp in private. She never missed a chance to remind Layla that she was the true blood granddaughter. While Layla was just adopted by love, still, Margaret had never made Layla feel less than family. Until now. As Layla stood in the grand study, surrounded by family portraits and antique clocks, the lawyer cleared his throat. "We're here to fulfill the final wishes of Margaret Eliza Waverly, as stated in her last and legally binding testament." Layla folded her hands over her chest. She expected to feel sorrow, but instead, her chest buzzed with anticipation. A part of her believed Margaret had left her something special, something meaningful. Maybe the sapphire brooch she always wore, or the first edition books they read together. The lawyer began to read. "To my granddaughter Violet Elaine Waverly, I leave the Waverly estate, including the family manor, vineyard shares, and remaining financial assets." Layla blinked. That was everything. Every single thing. There was a pause, a subtle one, the kind that signals the ending of a will. Layla's breath caught in her throat. She waited for her name. Nothing. Not a mention, not a keepsake, not a word. The lawyer closed the file. "That concludes Mrs. Waverly's final testament." Silence. Then whispers. Then pity-filled glances. Violet sat across the room, legs crossed, smirking gently with a look of fake sympathy that twisted like a knife in Layla's chest. Layla stood up slowly, her body cold. "There has to be a mistake," she said quietly. "I was with her every day. She wouldn't do this. She wouldn't leave me with nothing." Violet tilted her head. "Maybe she saw something in you she didn't like. Eventually, people change. Even grandmothers." The words echoed cruelly in the air. Layla didn't respond. She couldn't. The world felt like it had shifted beneath her feet. Her name erased. Her memories discarded. Her love betrayed. Something had happened in those final days. Something that changed everything. And now, Layla's grief had a companion. Vengeance. Not the kind that shouted. The kind that waited. The air outside the law office felt thinner, as if the oxygen had been sucked from Layla's chest and replaced with cold disbelief. She sat in her car, engine off, fingers trembling against the steering wheel. The words played over and over in her head. "That concludes Mrs. Waverly's final testament." No mention of her. No ring. No book. Not even a letter. She wasn't just left with nothing. She was erased. Forgotten. But that didn't make sense. Margaret had promised her the vineyard one day. They used to sit on the back porch and drink tea while watching the grape leaves shimmer in the sun. Someday, This will all be yours, she had said, brushing Layla's hair back like a mother would. That memory wasn't a dream. It was real. Her grandmother didn't just love her, she trusted her. So why would she leave it all to Violet? Violet, who never stayed more than 2 nights in the house unless there was a party or a holiday. Violet, who once tried to sell Margaret's antique earrings on a secondhand luxury app. Violet, who always smiled too wide when she lied. Layla turned her car back toward the estate, heart pounding. She wasn't ready to leave just yet. Not until she saw the house again, not until she stood in Margaret's room one more time. The manor was quiet when she arrived. Most of the relatives had already left, too eager to pretend they'd always been close to Margaret. But Violet was still there, sipping wine on the back patio like the queen of her new empire. Layla walked right past her, ignoring the smirk Violet threw her way. Margaret's room was just as she remembered. Lace curtains, lavender perfume, and the faint scent of old books. The sunlight poured across the floral quilt and framed photos still resting on the side table. One of them showed Layla at 16, standing beside Margaret with a blue ribbon from the county fair. Margaret's hand was proudly placed on her shoulder. Layla picked up the photo. She stared at it, hoping it would offer answers. But all it did was deepen the ache in her chest. Violet's voice came from the hallway. She wanted it that way, you know. Layla turned, her jaw tightening. You were always the little project. She felt sorry for you. But sympathy doesn't mean inheritance. She raised me, Layla said, voice low. You visited twice a year and called her a burden behind her back. Violet shrugged. Well, apparently, the burden preferred me in the end. Layla stared at her, something shifting in her expression, something Violet didn't recognize yet. This wasn't sadness anymore. It was calculation. I don't believe it, Layla whispered. She wouldn't change the will unless someone convinced her to, or forced her. Violet froze, her eyes narrowing. Layla stepped closer. I'm going to find out what really happened. I'm going to dig into every record, every signature, every visitor she had in those last weeks. If you think this is over, Violet, you don't know me at all. Violet's smile faltered. For the first time, the queen looked uneasy. Layla walked past her and out into the hallway. She didn't have her inheritance. She didn't have answers. But she had a suspicion. And soon, she'd have the truth. For 3 days, Layla didn't speak to anyone, not even her closest friends. The world outside continued moving, but inside her apartment, everything was still. Too still. Her phone buzzed, occasionally messages from nosy relatives, half-hearted check-ins from people who wanted gossip more than comfort, but she ignored them all. She sat at her kitchen table each night with a notepad, the edges frayed from anxious fingers. She wrote down everything she could remember from the last month of her grandmother's life. Visitors, calls, doctors, changes. One thing stood out. Margaret had stopped writing. Her grandmother, the woman who wrote Layla letters for every birthday, had sent none this year. No sticky notes on the fridge. No scribbled grocery lists. No journal entries. Nothing. It was as if the ink had run dry all at once. Layla's fingers tapped against her notebook. Margaret had been forgetful toward the end, but never silent. Even in pain, she had whispered soft stories about her youth, about the war, about love. The silence hadn't felt natural. It had felt imposed. She stood, grabbed her keys, and drove back to the estate. Violet had already begun making changes. The once elegant sitting room now smelled like perfume and expensive candles. Margaret's hand-woven quilts were folded and boxed in the hallway, labeled for donation. A loud pop song played from the stereo in the dining room. The house felt violated, its soul scrubbed clean. Layla didn't knock. She walked straight to Margaret's bedroom. Violet appeared a moment later, leaning on the door frame. I should change the locks, she said coldly. You can change the locks, Layla said, not looking up. But you can't change the truth. Violet laughed softly. Still on your little mystery hunt? I'm not hunting, Layla said. I'm remembering. She opened the bottom drawer of the writing desk, empty. The journal that used to be their Margaret's daily diary was gone. I know she used to write in a leather-bound journal every night. It had a purple ribbon as a bookmark. Violet gave a fake pout. Oh, maybe she threw it away. She was forgetful, remember? No, Layla said. She only got forgetful when you started spending more time here. Violet's smile cracked slightly, just for a second. That's a nasty little accusation. Not an accusation, Layla said quietly. Just a question. What were you doing in this room every night, Violet? What were you whispering to her when I wasn't around? Violet's face stiffened. Leave? Layla stepped forward. You erased me. Somehow. I don't know how yet. But I will find out. And when I do, I'll make sure you're the one boxed up and forgotten. Violet's mask slipped. The charm melted into pure venom. She chose me. Layla looked her dead in the eye. No. You chose to lie. And she died with that lie hanging over her. But not for long. That night, Layla dug deeper. She called the family lawyer, Mr. Howard. At first, he refused to say much, confidential, he said. But Layla had grown up hearing him joke with Margaret on the phone. She pressed gently, emotionally. She asked him if her grandmother had truly understood what she was signing that last week. There was a pause on the line. She was very tired, Layla, he finally said. And Violet was always in the room. I had no reason to doubt anything but you're doubting it now, Layla whispered. Another pause. Then he said, her signature didn't look quite right. I told myself it was because she was weak. But now, he trailed off. Layla closed her eyes. Her heart pounded. Something inside her clicked into place. This wasn't grief anymore. It was a quiet storm, rising in her chest. And soon, it would strike. The next morning, Layla stood in the county records office, fluorescent lights buzzing above her as she flipped through document after document. Paper cuts lined her fingers. Her eyes were heavy, but her mind was sharper than ever. She had requested Margaret's final will, along with the previous version signed a year earlier. The clerk handed them over without fuss. It was public record now, and the differences were glaring. The older version named Layla as the primary beneficiary, granting her full rights to the estate, the vineyard, and the heirlooms. Violet's name barely appeared, just a modest trust fund for education and future stability. But in the final version, Layla's name was completely absent, like she had never existed. Worse, the signature was off. Layla stared at it. The loops were shaky, but not in a natural way. It wasn't the kind of decline that came from age. It was inconsistent, almost as if someone had traced it by memory. She made a copy and slipped it into her folder. She visited Margaret's old nurse, Ms. Dolores, next. She trusted you, Layla said gently, sitting across from the kind woman in her cozy living room. You were there the last few weeks. Did you notice anything strange? Dolores hesitated, then glanced down at her hands. I don't want to stir trouble, she said softly. I don't need trouble. I need truth. Dolores sighed. Toward the end, your grandmother stopped speaking much. She was tired, yes, but also withdrawn, almost frightened, like someone had gotten to her. Layla felt a chill run down her spine. Violet, asked Dolores. Nodded. She was here every evening, alone, closed the door for long stretches. I once heard raised voices, and then silence. What did she say? I couldn't hear clearly. But one night, Margaret said, "This isn't what I want. You can't force me." Layla's breath caught. Dolores looked up, teary-eyed. The next day, she stopped speaking altogether. That night, Layla went back to the manor again. This time, she didn't care if Violet saw her. She headed to the fireplace in the library, the one Violet had oddly insisted be cleaned the day after Margaret's funeral. Something about that had stuck in her mind. Layla knelt by the ashes, brushing her gloved fingers through the remains. Most of it was cold and gray, but then she saw it, a half-burnt scrap of paper. Caught behind the grate, she reached for it carefully and pulled it out. It was fragile, but the corner still held ink. Margaret's handwriting. It read, "If anything happens to me, tell Layla." The rest was gone. Layla sat back, her heart pounding like a drum. That was it. Proof. Margaret knew something was wrong. And now, Layla had a trail one Violet thought she had erased in fire. But fire doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it reveals. The next morning, Layla sat at the old wooden kitchen table in her apartment, the half-burned paper placed carefully beneath a glass sheet. It was fragile, but it was Margaret's voice reaching out from beyond the grave. "If anything happens to me, tell Layla." Tell her what? That fragment whispered of a truth hidden too long. A secret too dangerous to say aloud, and one that might explain why Layla had been so brutally cut from the will. She needed more. She picked up her phone and called the only person who might know, Dr. Helen Avery, Margaret's old physician and longtime family friend. "I know this is a strange request," Layla said, "but did my grandmother ever get a DNA test done for any reason?" Dr. Avery was quiet for a long moment. Then, "That's unusual to ask, Layla. I think she suspected someone in the family wasn't who they claimed to be. Someone she didn't trust. And now, she's gone. And I'm out of her will. That's not a coincidence." Dr. Avery sighed. "She did ask me once about maternity comparisons. I assumed it was for some distant cousin issue. She had me collect samples quietly, confidentially." "Was it for Violet?" Layla asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," the doctor confirmed. "She never told me the full story, but she was upset after seeing the results." Layla's heart pounded. "Do you still have them?" "I do. I kept a private file, as she requested." An hour later, Layla sat in Dr. Avery's office, staring down at the cold, black and white truth. Violet was not Margaret's biological granddaughter. Not even close. She was the child of an affair. Margaret's son had fathered her with a woman he had a brief fling with during his marriage. Margaret had known, had kept it a secret for years to avoid family shame. But toward the end, something had changed. Maybe Violet had threatened to reveal it. Maybe she had used that knowledge to force her way into the will, to blackmail Margaret while she was weak and grieving and too tired to fight. It wasn't just a betrayal of Layla. It was a violation of blood, of lineage, of legacy. Back at the manor that night, Layla stepped into Margaret's study with new eyes. She opened the drawer one more time and found an envelope marked "Personal, do not destroy." It had been shoved behind the drawer panel, hidden out of sight. Inside was the last piece of the puzzle, a handwritten letter from Margaret to Layla, unfinished. "My dearest Layla, I know something is wrong. Violet is hiding things. She's watching me too closely. If anything happens to me, know this: my heart never changed. You were always the one, my true girl. The rest, it's lies she's spinning. Don't let her take everything. Not again." Layla stared at the final sentence. Not again. There had been a first betrayal, and now this second one. Violet hadn't just stolen the inheritance, she had manipulated, deceived, and likely frightened a dying woman into rewriting history. But Layla had the truth now. And the truth, in the right hands, could be sharper than any blade. Layla moved with quiet purpose now. Gone were the tears and shaken hands. In their place was a clarity sharpened by truth and betrayal. She had gathered for things, the forged Wilf DNA results, burnt letter fragment, and Margaret's final hidden note alone. They were whispers. Together they screamed fraud. But screaming wouldn't get her justice. Layla knew better than to confront Violet in a fit of rage. No. Violet played games behind closed doors, manipulated shadows. So Layla would do the opposite. She'd bring everything into the light. She reached out to an independent forensic analyst, a man named Ethan Roswell. He had helped a friend of hers during a document dispute years ago. He wasn't cheap, but truth, as Layla now knew, had a price. Ethan agreed to examine both versions of the will. It's subtle, he said after 2 days of analysis. But the signature on the new will, it doesn't match the muscle memory of the old ones. It's inconsistent, forced, likely traced or copied. And whoever did it wasn't the original signer. Layla's breath caught. You're saying it was forged? I'm saying. Ethan replied, it wouldn't hold up in court if challenged, especially with supporting evidence. She nodded slowly, heart pounding. Then she called a lawyer, a fierce, no-nonsense woman named Dana Whitaker, who had built her reputation dismantling high society estate fraud cases. Dana read everything Layla sent, then said, Violet's about to regret underestimating you. But Layla wasn't done. She returned to the manor, pretending to drop off a forgotten coat, her face composed. Violet greeted her at the door with a smirk, still clinging to ghosts. She said, swirling wine in her glass. Layla just smiled. No, just tying up loose ends. She walked through the house slowly, taking mental snapshots of what had changed. New furniture. Margaret's favorite books packed away. A portrait of Violet now hung above the fireplace. It wasn't grief Violet wanted. It was a throne. Layla paused by the hallway mirror and looked at her reflection. Calm, patient, dangerous. The next evening, Layla uploaded anonymized digital copies of the documents to a private cloud and shared them with Dana. She also posted a subtle teaser on social media, an old photo of her and Margaret in the vineyard, with the caption, she may be gone, but her truth hasn't been silenced. Hashtag coming soon, hashtag Waverly Legacy. Within hours, curious relatives started messaging her. The whispers began again, but this time, they weren't about Layla's failure. They were about Violet's fraud. Violet stormed into Dana's office 3 days later, furious. She demanded Layla stop slandering her. Dana responded with a chilling smile. You should be more careful about forging legal documents, especially ones you had no right to touch. Violet went pale. That night, Layla received a single text from her. You don't know what you're doing. Layla replied with 2 words, don't I? The storm was coming now, and Violet had no shelter left. The day of the Waverly Foundation's annual charity gala arrived, a glamorous event held every year in honor of Margaret's late husband, and now conveniently rebranded under Violet's control. But this year, Layla had a plan. She walked into the ballroom wearing her grandmother's sapphire brooch, the one Violet claimed had gone missing after the funeral. It sparkled proudly against her black dress, just like Margaret used to wear it. Violet noticed immediately. You're trespassing, she hissed under her breath as Layla walked past. No, Layla said calmly. I was invited. and I brought guests. Moments later, Dana Whitaker and Ethan Roswell stepped into the room, lawyer and forensic analyst. Real power in tailored suits. The speeches began. Violet took the stage with false elegance, thanking donors, honoring Margaret, painting herself as the true heir to the Waverly name. That was when Layla stepped forward, microphone in hand, voice steady. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her words slicing through the room. "But the truth can't stay buried, not even under silk gowns and forged signatures." Gasps echoed across the audience. Layla raised a printed copy of the forged will side by side with the original. Ethan walked over to the projection screen, highlighting the discrepancies. Dana followed with the DNA report, proving Violet was not a biological heir. Layla's voice never shook. She manipulated a dying woman. She forged legal documents. She stole not just wealth but a legacy. "My grandmother died in silence, but tonight she speaks." For a moment, there was only stillness, then murmurs, then outrage. The room, once Violet's stage, turned into a courtroom without walls. Two board members stepped forward and whispered something to the event director. One by one, supporters walked away from Violet. By the next morning, legal action had begun. Violet's accounts were frozen. The estate was placed under investigation. Dana moved quickly, petitioning the court to invalidate the forged will and restore Layla's rightful inheritance. And Violet, she was disgraced. Her face, once painted for cameras, now hid behind sunglasses and silence. She refused interviews, refused statements, because truth had teeth, and it had finally bitten down. That evening, Layla walked through the empty halls of the Waverly estate. This time, it felt like home again, not because of the furniture or title, but because she had reclaimed what was stolen. She entered Margaret's study, opened the window, and let the breeze in. On the desk, she placed a framed photo of her and Margaret. Her signature may have been erased, but Layla's revenge, it had been inked in blood. Weeks passed. The courts moved fast once the evidence was undeniable. Violet's forged will was formally invalidated, and Layla was reinstated as the rightful heir of the Waverly estate. The news made headlines. Heiress exposed. Violet Waverly disinherited after forgery. Scandal, justice for Layla. Court reverses. Will fraud in high-profile case. Layla didn't smile when she read them. Not because she wasn't relieved, but because justice wasn't something to celebrate. It was something to restore. Like breath, like balance, like truth. She walked the halls of the estate slowly now, not with a sense of ownership, but with reverence. Margaret's things had been returned to their rightful places. The sapphire brooch in her jewelry box, her handwritten letters sealed in a memory chest, and her journal recovered through a former housemaid locked in the top drawer of her desk, where it belonged. Layla spent a rainy afternoon reading its pages. Margaret had written everything. Her fears, her doubts, her heartbreak at realizing Violet's betrayal. She had felt weak, trapped, powerless. And worst of all, she had thought no one would believe her. Layla whispered through tears, "I believe you now. And so does the world." At the back of the property, beneath the old oak tree where Layla used to swing as a child, she buried a sealed letter in a small wooden box. It was addressed to the next Waverly who feels forgotten. Inside, she wrote, "They erased me, but I wrote myself back in. And if you're reading this, you can too. Never forget, legacy isn't just inherited. It's earned. And truth, once spoken, doesn't die." Layla Waverly. That night, Layla visited Margaret's grave. She knelt, placed white roses on the stone, and whispered, "They took your voice, but I gave it back." She stood tall, Looking out across the vineyard, everything was still. But it wasn't empty, it was hers now. Not just by law, but by love, by truth, by fire. The revenge was never about wealth, it was about restoring a name, a bond, a memory, and now it was done.